The moment I found Sandra Blackwood floating on a pink flamingo in my private pool at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday should have been my first clue that this woman had completely lost her mind. But no, I gave her the benefit of the doubt when she claimed she was conducting an emergency HOA water quality inspection. I'm David Hartley, 45 years old, software consultant, and the unfortunate owner of the only house in Maple Ridge Estates with an in-ground pool. When I bought this place 2 years ago after my promotion, I thought the 8-foot privacy fence and electronic gate would be enough to keep people out. I never imagined I'd need to defend my property from the HOA president herself. Sandra Blackwood was 63 years old, recently retired from her job as a middle school vice principal, and had apparently decided to channel all that unused authoritarian energy into making our neighborhood her personal kingdom. She'd been HOA president for 7 years. In that time, she created 143 new bylaws, including regulations on the acceptable shade of beige for garage doors and mandatory quarterly inspections of everyone's recycling bins. The woman carried a measuring tape in her purse to check if your grass exceeded the 2.5-inch maximum height. The pool incident started small. First, I'd find wet footprints on my deck when I came home from work. Then my pool chemicals started disappearing faster than they should. One morning, I discovered a bright purple pool noodle that definitely wasn't mine floating in the deep end. When I installed security cameras, Sandra showed up at my door the next day with a violation notice claiming my cameras violated the neighborhood's aesthetic guidelines. She said, with a sickeningly sweet voice, that surveillance equipment created an atmosphere of distrust in our harmonious community. I knew right then she'd been the one in my pool. The confrontations escalated quickly after that. I changed my gate code, and somehow she still got in. I found her teaching water aerobics to 3 other neighborhood women in my pool on a Saturday morning. When I demanded they leave, Sandra pulled out a document she claimed gave the HOA emergency access rights to all water features for safety inspections. The document was completely fabricated, of course, but she'd used official-looking letterhead and even added a fake notary seal. Her friend Margaret was filming the whole interaction on her phone, probably hoping I'd lose my temper so they could paint me as the unreasonable one. I started keeping a detailed log of every incident. July 15th, found Sandra's prescription sunglasses at the bottom of my pool. July 22nd, security footage showed her climbing over my fence at 11 p.m. with a pool ladder she dragged from her garage. July 29th, she actually had the audacity to host her book club meeting on my pool deck while I was at work. The security footage showed 7 women drinking wine and discussing their romance novel while their feet dangled in my pool. When I sent her a cease and desist letter from my attorney, she responded by filing 16 HOA violations against me in a single week. Everything from improperly sorted recycling to excessive doorbell ringing when I tested my new video doorbell. The war between us reached new heights when Sandra started recruiting allies. She convinced my next-door neighbor Tom that the chlorine from my pool was killing his roses, even though his roses were 30 feet away and dying because he never watered them. She told the family across the street that she'd seen suspicious people coming and going from my house at odd hours, which were actually just my pizza delivery drivers. She even started a petition to have my pool classified as a commercial facility, claiming I was secretly running an illegal Airbnb and letting guests use it. 23 people signed it before I could prove I'd never rented out my house. My breaking point came on August 14th. I'd taken a rare day off work to enjoy my pool in peace. I walked outside to find Sandra had not only broken in again but had actually brought a locksmith to change the lock on my gate. She stood there in a leopard print swimsuit with a clipboard, informing me that the HOA had voted to temporarily commandeer my pool for community use due to the extreme summer heat. The vote had apparently taken place in an emergency session at 6 a.m. that morning with only Sandra and her 2 vice presidents present. The locksmith looked uncomfortable as I called the police. The officers who arrived were familiar with Sandra from previous neighborhood disputes. Officer Johnson actually sighed when he saw her and muttered something about this being the 3rd call this month. Sandra tried to show them her fabricated HOA documents, but the officers weren't interested. They explained to her that HOA rules don't override property rights and trespassing laws. She argued with them for 20 minutes, citing made-up precedents and threatening to sue the entire police department for interfering with HOA business. They finally convinced her to leave, but not before she screamed that I was a selfish monster who didn't understand the meaning of community. That night, I met with my attorney, Robert, who happened to specialize in HOA disputes. We went through my documentation, which included 64 separate incidents of trespassing, hundreds of photos, and hours of security footage. Robert's eyes actually lit up when he saw the video of Sandra teaching unauthorized water aerobics. He said it was the most clear-cut case of HOA overreach he'd seen in 15 years of practice. We decided to take a two-pronged approach to deal with Sandra once and for all. First, we filed criminal trespassing charges with the district attorney's office. The sheer volume of evidence made it impossible to ignore. Second, we prepared a presentation for the next HOA board meeting, which, according to the actual bylaws that Sandra had apparently never fully read, could result in the immediate removal of any board member found guilty of using their position for personal gain or committing crimes against neighborhood residents. Robert also discovered that Sandra had been embezzling HOA funds to pay for pool maintenance supplies that she'd been using in my pool. She'd submitted receipts for chlorine tablets, pool shock, and testing strips, claiming they were for maintaining the neighborhood's decorative fountain, which had been dry for 3 years. The criminal case moved faster than expected. The district attorney, tired of dealing with Sandra's numerous petty disputes over the years, decided to make an example of her. She was charged with criminal trespassing, theft, fraud, and harassment. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage alone showed her in my pool on 47 separate occasions. Her own social media posts, which she'd foolishly made public, included photos of her and her friends enjoying what she called the neighborhood's best-kept secret pool. She'd even left reviews of pool floaties on Amazon, mentioning how perfect they were for her daily swims. The HOA board meeting took place while Sandra was out on bail. The community center was packed with almost every homeowner in attendance. Word had spread about Sandra's arrest, and people were eager to see what would happen. I presented my evidence methodically, showing video after video of Sandra trespassing, the fraudulent documents she created, and the receipts proving she'd stolen HOA funds. The crowd gasped when I showed the footage of her bringing a locksmith to change my gate lock. Even her loyal supporters couldn't defend that. Sandra arrived halfway through my presentation, wearing a business suit and carrying a briefcase full of what turned out to be more fake documents. She tried to interrupt, claiming I'd doctored the videos, but the board's attorney had already verified their authenticity. She then tried to rally support by saying I was attacking her because she was a strong woman who wouldn't be intimidated. That might have worked if I hadn't shown the video of her using bolt cutters on my new lock while wearing a shirt that said, "World's Best Grandma." The vote to remove her from the HOA board was unanimous. Even her vice presidents voted against her. The board's attorney then announced that the HOA would be pursuing civil action to recover the $3,700 in embezzled funds. Sandra's face went from red to purple to a concerning shade of white. She stood up, pointed at me, and declared that this was a conspiracy orchestrated by bitter renters who didn't understand property values. Security had to escort her out when she started throwing her fake documents at board members. 2 months later, Sandra stood before Judge Patterson in criminal court. Her attorney had tried to argue that she suffered from a chlorine addiction that impaired her judgment, which the judge called the most creative defense he'd heard in 30 years on the bench. The evidence was presented over 2 days, including testimony from 6 other neighbors who'd caught Sandra in their yards at various times. The judge seemed particularly offended by the fake HOA documents, saying that forging official-looking documents showed premeditation and deliberate deception. Sandra was found guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced her to 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, specifically not related to any HOA activities, and ordered her to pay $11,000 in fines and restitution. She also received a restraining order preventing her from coming within 100 feet of my property. When the sentence was read, Sandra fainted dramatically, falling backward into her attorney's arms while shouting that justice was dead in America.